Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And I'm sorry for the delay. I happen to be in New York and the hotel Wi-Fi went down. And I'm now somewhere where there might be a crowd of people around me anytime soon, but let's hope there isn't. We are recording these sessions. Your face will not be shown. We want you to interact with our guest, ask questions and challenge. But if you want to be anonymous, just say no name anonymous and I'll feed it in through the chat and we will have our interactive conversation. I now count to 5 and then we begin in earnest. Hello, welcome on this fine Jubilee celebration day. And I happen to be in New York where I'm teaching and speaking at an international thriller writers conference, and our esteemed guest is in Bath, I think, in the United Kingdom, where he is about to unveil for us the secrets, good and bad, about our cherished health service that protects us all, and about the heaviest organ of our body on which he is an expert. Now, do not confuse his book's title with that Cole Porter song, Under the Skin. That was about love. This is about a different kind of passion that takes us far behind the scenes of the National Health Service. Through him, we're going to be meeting some of the giants of Britain's healthcare, including David Lloyd George, who introduced a national insurance scheme for the low paid, and Aneurin Bevan, widely regarded as the founder of the NHS, which was launched on July the 5th, 1948. Our guest, who's sitting patiently waiting for me to finish here, our guest is also a traveler, once backpacking from roughly where I am now to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and he has been, or still is, we'll find out, an advisor to his profession at Shanghai in China, and he worked in Cape Town, so he's a veritable under-the-skin trailblazer. Welcome, Alex Anstey, to Goldster Inside Story.
Thank you very much for that introduction.
That's great. Now, I asked this of all our, when we have medical people on, are you a doctor or a mister?
So no, I'm a doctor. I'm also an honorary professor. So I'm what's called a clinical academic, which means I'm a physician by training, but I do lots of academic stuff as well, or I have done in my career, teaching and research.
You're a double doctor, really, a medical doctor and an academic doctor. So Doctor Squared, is that right?
Sort of.
Now, you are a dermatologist by trade. But we like to begin our programs here with a basic question. So what exactly is the skin and what does it do?
So the thing about the skin, of course, is you can see it. So it's importance to human beings is terribly high. Because, of course, so much of human interaction involves looking at each other and seeing each other. So our skin is really, really important for putting our best face forward. And also you see how important the skin is when things go wrong. So when the skin starts failing for one reason or another, all sorts of stuff happens, negative stuff. And in fact, when you look at quality of life indices and measure and compare between different organs in the body, the skin is right up there as one of the most important organs for human beings. So skin disease causes just as much impact and disability and loss of function as you know, serious disease in kidneys and heart and other organs.
You talk about kidneys and heart and sort of basic organs that we know, and you talk about their failure, a failed kidney, a failed heart, a failed lungs and that sort of thing. But do you get failed skin? I mean, does it completely fail and does it kill you?
You can get failed skin, yeah, and certainly it can kill you. You know, extensive skin disease, when the skin, one of the prime functions of the skin is as a barrier to the external environment. And when the skin starts failing, as it does in a number of different skin diseases, we're very susceptible, in particular to infection. And people will be aware that the infection that causes death is sepsis. And certainly a cause of sepsis is skin failure.
Right. Okay. So I want to get into all of them, because you have some very graphic things in your book. Now, I don't have a copy of the book, but show everybody the copy of the book that you have here. That's it, Under the Skin. And what's the subtitle there?
Under the Skin, a dermatologist's fight to save the NHS.
Right, and I'm just going to put that in the chat as we discuss this. So there we go. I've got it all there. We're going to go into that because you have some very graphic scenes in there, a sort of compilations of patients, waiting lists, your crowded clinics and all that. But how did you get into it, Alex? Because when you were a child and you were discussing with your school friends whether to be a train driver or a soldier or an astronaut, did you say, oh, I think I want to go and study skin?
No, it didn't happen like that, and I don't think it does for many, actually. I mean, it's a sort of question of dread for most medical students when they meet up with their family and friends. The first thing people say is, and what are you going to specialize in? And we all hate being asked that, because to be honest, none of us really know. It's very unusual for doctors to have a clear idea of what they're going to end up.
You knew you wanted to be a doctor, did you?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to be a doctor. I worked that out at school. I was interested in the whole idea of medicine, and I was very interested in science, and the two went well together. Yeah, I moved in that direction. I took science A-levels with the intention of applying to medical school, and that's what I did. But once I'd arrived at medical school, it really was, my experience was that very few people knew exactly what they wanted to do. For most of us, it almost seemed unreal that we were going to end up as doctors at the end of this process, because none of us felt like doctors when we started at medical school. But of course, that gradually changes, and the medical school prepares you for what's going to happen. In my own case, it was a number of years of clinical practice in different disciplines before I worked out where my interests lay and where my strengths lay and what I really wanted to do.
Was there a sudden moment you said, this is what I want to concentrate on, this is what I focus on, I don't want to do the eyes, I don't want to do the wrists, I'm not going to...
Well, there's a lot of that happens. So you do, and I'm just like any other doctor in respect to that. You quickly work out the stuff you don't want to do. And normally the big decider is between medicine and surgery. And some people want to do surgery, and that immediately puts puts them in a career route. I personally didn't want to do surgery. I wanted to be a physician. And that immediately excluded all of the surgical disciplines. But within medicine, I hadn't had much experience of the different disciplines. But as a junior doctor, you end up joining these clinical rotations where you have 6 months in a job and then you move on to the next job. So you get a chance to dip into each discipline and see what they're like and see what the fit is like. And I guess part of it is also looking at the doctors who are in it and seeing who are the ones who you admire, who are the ones who inspire you. So a lot of it is about role modeling and thinking, do I see myself becoming someone like him or her?
And then talking about training as a doctor or being a junior doctor, you have a very telling sentence in there amongst a large description. I felt sorry for patients having me as their doctor. What on earth did you mean by that?
I meant as a junior doctor, in fact, I was just a houseman. I was so, in those days, the training was totally different to how it is now. I think the doctors who come out of medical school, and my son has just started as a junior doctor. He's an F1 in Oldham. But he was fantastically well prepared for being a junior doctor by Manchester Medical School. Everything he needed, practical skills, emotional skills, human interactive skills, all sorts of stuff he was trained in. Well, I qualified in 1983, and we didn't get that sort of training. We really didn't. We had precious little practical skill. The idea was that you just learnt on the job, and that was a horrible thing to experience, because of course you end up practicing on patients. And there I was as a young man without any great skills, seeing all these sick people and having to do procedures on them and not having a whole load of skills that I really needed. I quickly acquired those skills, but it was horrible experience for the first few months.
I mean, you also have a line in there, and I don't know whether this is today or the training that you were talking about before. Few GPs have training in skin cancer recognition. Is that still the case?
Well, few GPs have training in dermatology, and part of dermatology is skin cancer recognition. So dermatology has not really had the emphasis that it deserves, because so many doctors end up as GPs, and so much of general practice is dermatology. It's absolutely remarkable how much skin disease is seen in primary care and dealt with by the GPs. And again, the GPs develop a level of expertise, but at medical school, they get very little training. Most medical schools, the training in dermatology is minimal. In Wales, actually, that changed. And by the time I worked in Wales most of my career, and by the time I left, the medical students from Cardiff University were all getting 2 weeks of dermatology, which was good. That was much more than most other medical schools offer.
And I'm just trying to picture this, because you walk into a GP, I mean, our bodies are all skin, aren't they? So you have a bruise on your ankle that could be something, and that would show up first on the skin, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So dermatology is also sort of working out whether that's a bruise or whether it's a skin problem, or whether it's, so it is a huge issue, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and it is, and I suppose because of that immediacy, that visibility, I suppose patients not really having the ability to work it out for themselves. It just means there's a great demand. They're constantly going to the GP wanting stuff checked, and often dermatology is thrown into the mix. So they go, patients go with one thing, and they say, "Oh, doctor, while I'm here, do you mind looking at this?" And the poor GP, their heart sinks, because they know they're running 15 minutes late, and the last thing they need is another 10 minutes of consultation about something they weren't expecting. But it happens all the time. Dermatology often gets thrown in as a, "While I'm here, doctor."
Yes, well, I've got this little thing here, or this white spot here, or something like that. Angie's asked a question here, and this will get us into the sort of nitty gritty of or some of it, because we're going to talk about the people that founded the National Health Service too. But Angie says, are there significant differences relating to A, gender, and B, ethnicity in the diagnosis and treatment of skin disorders and traumas?
Great question, Angie. Is it age and ethnicity? Yes, I mean there's incredible.
Gender and ethnicity. So
gender and ethnicity. Yes, definitely. There's skin diseases we see just in women and not in men. And certainly ethnic dermatology is really, really important. And dermatologists quickly develop expertise depending on the population they serve. Here in Bath, we don't have a big ethnic population. We've got quite a few students in Bath, but in South Wales there were much bigger ethnic populations. So I had more exposure to different skin colours and different types of skin disease through that in my training.
Is there a specific disease that you could say with the South Asian or the African or something like that that is prevalent, that is not prevalent, or is more prevalent in Caucasian? Is there?
Well, a disease I became interested in and became an expert in photodermatology. And there's one of the things we used to see in very poor malnourished people, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, but also in the Far East, was a terrible condition called pellagra, which was a niacin deficiency. It's a vitamin deficiency, but it manifested with terrible photosensitivity condition where the skin literally disintegrated and became very darkly pigmented. And but it was a really severe disease, and it was one that killed people. So it was really the only photosensitivity condition that included death as one of its features. It was a horrendous problem, but we don't see that in the UK. It's really a sign of starving populations who are malnourished, and who particularly end up subsiding on corn, because corn is cheap and it tastes good and it fills your tummy, but it doesn't give you the sufficient vitamins. And patients who subside on corn end up corn alone end up being deficient in niacin. That's just one example.
You mentioned that. I remember at school learning about scurvy on the sort of shed. They didn't have enough fruit and vitamins. Was that a skin disease?
Yes, that's more because we, as dermatologists, we deal with skin and hair and nail and mucous membrane. So in particular, scurvy affects the mucous membrane. So you end up with the lining of the mouth and the gums start bleeding and disintegrating. I mean, another one, a good example of a sort of ethnic one is vitiligo. So vitiligo is depigmentation of the skin. So it's an autoimmune disease, really quite common. 1 to 2% of the population get it. But if you're white and you develop depigmentation, the whiter patches of vitiligo really don't show up much because the background color of the skin is white. But if you've got black skin and you develop white patches, it's absolutely devastating. The appearance is extremely bizarre, and the poor people affected by it have terrible trouble. It has a big stigma attached to it, and it's a really horrendous problem. Again, it's a condition I've been interested in through my career, because part of the solution has been to use ultraviolet light therapy, and UV therapy is something I'm particularly interested in.
Oh, that's because that's interesting, because there are two elements here. There's a sort of disease that you've got to this organ but there's also the way you present yourself. You said at the beginning, if you've got a sort of huge rash or something here, then you're going to feel completely underwhelmed about yourself and worried how people see you. Is that the psychological element of it? Must be huge.
Yes, it is huge, and we all know that as dermatologists. The psychological impact can be devastating and is very big. And so I think the people who get drawn into dermatology are naturally attracted by the need to try and help patients psychologically. So in my experience, most dermatologists are really quite gifted at helping patients through the psychological aspects of skin disease. But having said that, we are not psychologists, and certainly many of our patients would benefit from support and seeing a psychologist. And in fact, something in Bath we're just in the process of starting to do is create links between the psychology department of Bath University and our own department. And in the long term, we hope that this might lead to us recruiting a psychologist to help us with patients with the psychological aspects of skin disease.
Which brings me neatly, actually, into something I think you set up earlier, and what I'd like you, the dermatology integrated care that you sort of set up. But can you give us the picture that led to that, of your community in Wales, the clinics that you had, the types of patients? Because you paint a very graphic picture of that. Really brought home to me the pressure the NHS is under, the lack of funding, and also the type of work that you and your colleagues do.
Yes, this was towards the end of my time in Wales. I spent 6 years in Bangor in North Wales. Up until then, I've been in South Wales, in Newport and Cardiff. And when I came up to North Wales, I joined another colleague, Andy McFarlane, a wonderful guy, very good dermatologist, and he and I really worked well together. We had a great unit, a dedicated team, so on and so forth. And things were good for a couple of years, but Andy retired. So all of a sudden I found myself on my own as a single-handed consultant. And we just couldn't cope with the volume of the work. There was just too much work coming in. And we were really running the service in the same way that we'd run it for the past 30 or 40 years. And it seemed to me that the service was failing. Everything about the service was failing. And this was brought home to me. And my book starts with a description of a clinic where it suddenly dawned on me that everything about our service was failing, and we needed to do something about it. But
and you said you said that you were up against it, everything was coming in, and you said you were completely lost. But what would Betsy Cadwallader do? So tell us who Betsy is.
Well, yes, I mean that was because woven into the story in my book is the story of 10 individuals who, for one reason or another, I revere. These are wonderful people who are all in healthcare, or some of them are politicians. But they're politicians who've had a lasting impact on health and healthcare in the UK. And there I was in North Wales in the Betsy Cadwallader University Health Board, which begs the question, who was Betsy Cadwallader? So I was intrigued. I'm interested in history. I'm interested in the history of medicine. So I did a sort of straw poll, and I started going around and asking people who she was. And to my surprise, no one really knew. The most I'd get out of people was that she was a nurse. And then some people would say something like, oh, she was a contemporary of Florence Nightingale. And both of those things are true. But very few people I came across knew anything more about Betsy Cadwallader.
Say contemporary, she worked for Florence Nightingale, and Florence Nightingale, you mentioned, was privileged, but Betsy was sort of grassroots, grit of the mill.
Betsy was grassroots. Betsy was just a working class girl from Bala in North Wales. I think her story is quite remarkable. Amazingly, someone captured her story because she came back from the Crimea, where she did distinguished service as a nurse, really doing incredible stuff. Somewhat remote to Florence Nightingale. They sort of fell out. They were not kindred spirits at all, but there they both were in this extreme environment trying to cope.
Betsy was 65 at the time. I mean, she was not she went out to the Crimea War at 65.
Yeah, it's quite incredible. But she was in her early 60s. She came back at 65, I think. And she was not a young woman, but that was her nature. She'd spent her life up until then crisscrossing the globe as a sort of ship steward, really, looking after the passengers in these ocean-going boats going to Tasmania and Australia and Rio de Janeiro and Calcutta, literally all over the oceans. And she did that for nearly 40 years, looking after the paying passengers, and in many cases delivering their babies and caring for them if they were sick and making sure the kitchens produced enough food for everyone. Remarkable stuff. But of course, what she did was she acquired some incredible practical skills. And when she was sent out to the Crimea, it was Betsy who knew how to do stuff, because she'd spent her whole life problem solving and rolling up her sleeves and getting on with it in a way that was really it was just second nature to her.
So you said to yourself, you had this pile of work coming in the Welsh community, fairly poor people, fairly, not privileged at all in a way. And you said to yourself, what does Betsy do? And then what did you do? Well, you took that, and then what did you do?
Okay, so what we did, I did this as a team. I've always been very keen on team working, and I can see that teams always outperform individuals. It was really crucial for us to have a team approach to this. And basically what we did is we looked at the model of care we were providing, and then we tried to come up with a new way of doing it. And what we came up with, and I did this with our managers and with the senior GPs, what we came up with, we called dermatology integrated care. And in essence, that involved the GPs and the specialist team working together. And because in the NHS, ever since I've been in the NHS since 1983, actually the GPs and the hospital specialists have moved further and further apart. And the people who have suffered from that have been the patients. So it seemed to me a really good opportunity to actually flip the model to try and do far more care in primary care and to help the GPs to do that. So that's basically
what get the GPs more knowledgeable about that. And just to interrupt our narrative arc here, Gillian asked, does sunlight help vitiligo?
Vitiligo, yeah, vitiligo. Does sunlight help?
Yes.
Yes, it can do. It's a form sunlight in the middle of the day when the ultraviolet levels are high, between 11 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon. There's lots of UVB in sunlight, and UVB can help vitiligo to repigment. And in fact, in India, where there are plenty of people who can't afford expensive hospital healthcare, a standard way of treating vitiligo is it's called heliotherapy. It just means sun therapy.
So explain to us what the condition is again in a nutshell.
It's like this condition where it's an autoimmune disease where the patient's immune system attacks the melanocytes, the pigment producing cells in the skin. And what that produces is big patches of depigmented skin, which is devastating. The darker your skin is, the more cosmetically bizarre it looks. And it has a huge impact on patients' quality of life. But one of the best ways of treating vitiligo is with ultraviolet light therapy, and that can either be in the hospital with phototherapy or using sunlight therapy. And worldwide, sunlight therapy is often used, particularly in India.
Okay, and whilst we're sort of on our tangent here, Justine asked, do burns and skin grafts come under dermatology?
Great question. No, not really. They come under plastic surgery. By convention, they're dealt with by plastic surgeons. Yeah. Okay. Dermatologists do skin grafts because we do a lot in surgery now, and there are some dermatologists who do skin grafts to close deficits when they've cut out particularly big skin cancers. So we do skin grafts, but in the context of burns and skin grafts, no, that's plastic surgery.
Angie has a question. Angie, we're going to get your question in a moment because we're going to ask Alex to now talk about some of the founding figures of the service. And then you have a phrase, I think, from when from the Thatcher days, I think it was, but it might apply now rather than focus on improving the NHS. The Conservatives were obsessed with defence in Europe. So who were the figures, Lloyd George and Euron Bev, and I mentioned that, and what was their vision and what has happened to their vision today?
Well, Lloyd George, I mean, part of my interest in many of these characters was by a quirk of fate. I ended up co-located one way or another with these people where they lived or where they worked. So Lloyd George, for example, came from North Wales, and I did a clinic just down the road from his home, and I used to drive past his home, and his home is now a museum. It's so you can go and visit his home, see where he lived, and see where he was buried, and there's a little gift shop and so on and so forth, and it's really nice. It's a beautiful, it's a lovely museum. And I was really struck once. I was reading the Sunday papers a few years ago, and I was reading an article about great prime ministers and who the greatest prime ministers in the UK, and a whole load of journalists were polled on this, and so Winston Churchill came out top, which I think is not so much of a surprise. But what do you think of who was the number two? Who came second? And it was David Lloyd George who came second. And I suddenly realized I knew very little about Lloyd George, and yet here I was working in North Wales, driving past his home where he lived with his wife, and his second home where he lived with his second wife, and where he was buried. And I thought, this is madness. I'm just going to visit. I've got to learn more about this guy. and one thing led to another. He's a really inspiring character. He became prime minister. He was Chancellor of the Exchequer at a terribly young age, and was a great success at it. And then he became prime minister in the middle of the First World War, when we looked like we were going to lose the First World War, and he turned things around. And of course, we prevailed. But the thing about him is what he's remembered for is he was a campaigning politician, campaigning for social equality, and he came from a poor background, and he never forgot that. He represented the poor and the excluded.
But you said Churchill was obviously number one, but we have to remember there's this time is that Churchill got voted out of office in July, I mean, before the Pacific War was ended, and the Labour came in, and in Labour's manifesto, whatever, was the creation of the National Health Service. So in that landslide vote that got rid of this wartime hero, was the British mindset that it put the National Health Service and social welfare above the defence of the country? What was going on there?
Yeah, I'm not absolutely sure. I'm not a historian. I'm just a sort of amateur who's interested in these things. But I guess there was a sense at that stage that the defense of the country had happened and we had prevailed, and now was not the time to be spending more time thinking about war and warfare and stuff like that. There was a strong desire to rebuild society, and of course, because of Lloyd George had laid the foundations by creating the welfare state and by creating pensions and sickness benefit and a whole raft of different things that he brought in. And really, without that, you don't get Nye Bevan, you don't get the creation of the NHS. So the two, I think, although they're separated by many, many years, it was Lloyd George's work that laid the foundations for the NHS being created in 1948.
Yes, so they were the two great figures there that created it. Now, when you look at it today, and also I remember, and I'm sure you do, the opening Olympic ceremony, which was 10 years ago now, where Danny Boyle, when he created that ceremony, had the NHS centerpiece to it, didn't it? So it's still very much in our hearts today, but does it operate, do you think, as Bevan would have envisaged? Is it better or worse, or what would you say?
Well, no, not now. I mean, Bevan had went off in a strop after just 2 years because of what he perceived as a softening of the position on the National Health Service. With, I think it was introduction of charges for, it was either dentures or glasses. It was one or the other, or maybe both. He on a matter of principle resigned, which was a terrible shame, really. He did the difficult thing, making it happen, and it would have been great if he had have followed through. I mean, again, Bevan, by a total quirk of fate, I ended up as the dermatologist that covered his constituency. So Ebervale and Tredegar were my patch when I worked in South Wales. So I ended up doing clinics in Ebervale and visiting Tredegar Hospital. Now, so I knew this area inside out. When I started reading about Bevan and learning more about him, it all became so vivid because I had first-hand experience of those communities, which were not so very different in my time as they were in his time. These what were previously coal mining communities.
Before we get to Andrew's question, which I'm going to go to, give us another of the big figures, because you have, I think, 10 of them in the book.
Well, Jenner. Jenner's so important. So Jenner's one I wasn't co-located with. He was just over the river. He lived in Gloucestershire. So Jenner was remarkable for coming up with a vaccination for smallpox. Smallpox was a massive scourge It was estimated, I mean, hundreds of millions of people died from smallpox before it was eradicated. And it was eradicated because of vaccination. And it was Jenner who came up with the vaccination. And he came up with this vaccination. This is, to me, the incredible bit of the story. He came up with this vaccination before bacteria and viruses had been identified and discovered. He was nearly 100 years before. So that, no one had any understanding of bacteria and viruses. And yet
it was that actually led to the eradication of smallpox eventually.
Yes.
Because I remember as a kid having this smallpox jab in my arm that came out like a little circle.
Yeah, that's right. So he worked out that there was this thing, cowpox, which was and the story goes that he observed the milkmaids in Gloucestershire and who all ended up getting cowpox off the cows, and none of them ever got smallpox. And he's like an epidemiologist. He was just using observations and using his intelligence to work out that something important was going on here. Funnily enough, he was not the first person to work this out, but the thing about him was he was the first person who applied scientific principles and tried to prove his point. So what he did was he collected together a case series, and he demonstrated that by vaccinating people with the cowpox virus, you were able to induce immunity, which made them not get smallpox. And if they didn't get smallpox, they wouldn't die from smallpox. It was a remarkable thing, and it was recognized in his lifetime.
Alex is frozen.
I've frozen. You seem to have frozen.
Shall we carry on? Just carry on with dinner. I'm sure Humphrey will come back.
Okay. So I was just saying about Jenner. One of the amazing parts of his story was that he persuaded the scientific community that his research about smallpox and cowpox was valid, and quite quickly everyone came to accept it. And then he ended up being rewarded by a king and by Parliament. He was given a huge amount of money, £10,000, and which in those days was a lot of money. And then just a few years later, he was given a second unrestricted fund of £20,000, which in today's money would be like £1 million, just to spend as he saw fit. So it was amazing recognition of the achievement that he had done.
So I have to ask you now, although it's probably got nothing to do with it at all, monkeypox, what is that?
Well, yeah, monkeypox has been around for a long time. It's a virus infection, and it does manifest in the skin with pustules and vesicles. Typically, there's a prodromal period, so the patient feels unwell for a few days with a sort of flu-like illness, and they often develop enlarged lymph glands, what we call lymphadenopathy, and then they come out in this terrible rash. And it's in some respects it's similar to the chickenpox rash. So, because one of the features of chickenpox is it affects the lining of the mouth, so you can get it on the gums and in the insides of the mouth and on the palate, but you get these pustules and blisters on the body, and the pustules coalesce. It's not a very nice thing to have.
And that's all dermatology, is it?
Well, we do end up seeing, yes, because of the florid skin reaction, we do end up seeing cases. And of course, there's a little bit of an outbreak at the moment in the UK, but it's not that contagious. It's spread by droplets. Which means that you very close exposure does put people at risk, but it's much less contagious than coronavirus or something like that.
So I just wonder, back to your vivid descriptions again, there was one case that you have in the book, and I think I should add, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is that these are real cases, but you fictionalize them and sort of compile them, but they actually did happen. And there was one woman, I think, that comes in and she's got quite severe skin cancer, and it's taken a year to get to see you.
Yes, so that was from the opening chapter of the book. So before we changed the system, everything was going wrong. And one of the things that was happening was that our fast track for skin cancer was just being completely swamped with benign stuff because the GPs didn't know, and they were not wanting to take a risk, so they were sending in anything and everything to have cancer excluded. And then trying to find this cancer in amongst all these referrals was like hunting for a needle in a haystack. And the patient that was it was a fictional case, but the patient that's being described had been the GP had just sent a referral saying, "Oh, I think it's benign, but I'd like you to check it." So she'd had to wait. And benign, given a routine appointment, routine appointments are waiting for a year at that stage. So this poor woman had waited for a year with a melanoma, which is a skin cancer that can kill you.
During that year, I mean, if she had seen you straight away, would you have been able to help her more than you were?
Yeah. So the whole point about fast track for skin cancer is we try and see people within 2 weeks, and it works really well. But what is the thing that's transformed things is teledermatology. So this is the use of photographs with referrals. So now, I mean, a few years ago, this was not standard practice. It is now standard practice pretty much across the UK. And it gives us a much better opportunity to work out what patients need to be seen quickly within 2 weeks, and what patients perhaps can wait longer, and what patients actually don't even need to see us. So that's all done now with photographs, and the immediacy of that, you know, every day in Bath, we get 50 or 60 similar referrals as teledermatology, and we respond to them all within 24 hours.
Well, that takes us, I think, straight to Angie's question, which I think asks that. There's a piece in this week's Spectator arguing that the NHS general practice is broken. NH England has pushed GPs to total triage, remote consultation.
Okay, so I'll just I'll talk about Humphrey's frozen again. So yes, so general practice is really struggling, and but certainly that for us in dermatology, the teledermatology has given us this amazing tool which allows us to interact with each other in a much more immediate way than we ever did before. You know, previously it was always distant, it was always by letter, and we had most dermatology departments operated with 3 different priorities. One was 2 weeks for skin cancers, and then urgent referrals, which should be seen within 4 weeks, and then routine referrals should be seen in 3 months. And in North Wales, we ended up, before we changed the system, our urgents were having to wait for 4 months, and our routine referrals were having to wait for a year or sometimes even longer, which was obviously completely unacceptable.
And is that changing now because of this? I mean, the problem is realized. You have the techniques to do it. I mean, is there a move now? It's appearing in the papers. Do you think this is something which the government is taking hold of?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the government. It's just happened. It's happened by necessity. In North Wales, we did teledermatology on the cheap because we just used the Welsh Clinical Portal, which is an email system, and I just got the GPs to attach photographs to the emails. So we did it on the cheap because the health board had no money to pay for a bespoke platform. But I joined the department in Bath just over a year ago. We've got really one of the best teledermatology platforms that's commercially available. It's absolutely outstanding. And allows us to interact in a very satisfactory way with the GPs, and it's easy for them to use. And most importantly, it's integrated into the clinical record because there's so many of these sort of computer systems that are standalone and none of them talk to each other. And so this is wonderful because it becomes part of the GP record and also part of the hospital record.
I see. I'm not sure whether you disappeared or I disappeared there. We're having a technical thing, but we have a question in which has now disappeared. I think from I haven't got the name, but Can you really diagnose it from a photograph? I think is the number.
Yes, sometimes. I mean, it's a really good question. Some of the photographs are not good enough, and you really can't tell. But many of the GPs use devices called dermatoscopes, which are they look like an ophthalmoscope. Those things that doctors peer into your eyes and into your ears with. So it looks just like that, but it's a high-powered magnifying device with bright illumination, LED illumination, which allows the GP to get a really good quality magnified image of the skin. And now many of the GPs have a camera attached to this device, and they send these dermoscopy images with their referral, which is incredible.
I mean, it sort of must cut through a lot of stuff actually having to get and wait in a clinic and all the rest of it. But Angie comes back to us to say teledermatology is predicated on functioning access to GPs, and that is what is broken. Is that what you see, Alex, or not?
Well, I think there are massive challenges in primary care at the moment. I'm not sure about broken, but I know that primary care is really, really struggling for a multitude of reasons. And I know many GPs, and I know they're very dedicated, hardworking people. They're trying to do a great job. They're as frustrated as anyone. I think it was one of the unintended consequences of the Health and Social Care Act of 2012, this massively wasteful creation of a market for healthcare in England, which didn't achieve what it was meant to achieve, and has subsequently been abandoned. But it cost a huge amount of money, and there was so much infrastructure set up to try and make it happen. And unfortunately, it had an attritional effect on many staff in the health service, including many doctors who left.
So that was an act of 10 years ago, sort of blurs with this. But if you were running the National Health Service and with the skills that you know, what is the next step you want to do? Do you have to fix things, or can you create new things?
Well, that's such a big and complicated question, and it's as a dermatologist and as a clinician, it's not really for me to come up with those solutions, but I can make some observations. And I mean, what I would say is that the political interference in the National Health Service has been massively to the detriment of the NHS, and it's not just Conservative governments that are guilty here. Labour have also been responsible, and the coalition government. So all the political parties have joined in this, and I think one of the fundamental things that we need to go back to basics. We need to see, what was it that was so brilliant about Bevan's vision? We need to try and recapture that. And I think really the only way of doing that is to have a new constitution for the NHS, and one where the NHS is accountable to Parliament, but is independent of political interference. In much the same way as we saw Gordon Brown bring in the Bank of England to decide on interest rates. You'll remember, Humphrey,
yes.
A political thing, but that was very insightful. That actually the politicians messing around with interest rates was not in anyone's interest. And then the other, George Osborne actually did something good, which was he introduced the Office for Budget Responsibility. And again, that was independent. The whole idea was it would have independence from the political parties and would be able to make projections about the economy and GDP. I think we need something like that for...
Instead of being a political football, which it is in every election.
Exactly, because we waste so much money and it's so demoralizing every time it is a political football. So that's one thing. And the two other big things they're very obvious. One of them is funding. We all know we've had 12 years of austerity, and that really needs to change it, and it needs to change in such a way where we've not only got to fund it properly, but we've also got 12 years of catch up, which people don't sometimes think about.
So what it was doing, I presume, when Labour came in '97, after what 12 years of conservative rule, when, as you said, they were obsessed with the defence and Europe. Alex, we're running out of time, and time. But before, I want you to hang around whilst I talk about what's coming up, because a couple of things might interest you. But before we do that, just give me a few seconds on, if think you've got skin cancer, what are you going to be seeing on your body
so it's often the bald scalp in men, the tops of the ears in men. You're okay, Humphrey. You've got a nice head of hair, so your ears would be.
You're diagnosing me straight off there.
Now I can see, because women have a massive advantage of a head of hair, which protects their ears and protects their scalp. So there's a big gender difference in skin cancer between men and women. Women tend to get them on the nose and the backs of the hands and the lower legs, whereas men it's tops of the ears and the scalp.
And that's all the sort of sun. You have your arm out in the car, or the sun's on the steering wheel as you go for a long drive. That's what you've got to sort of watch it. So you put your suntan lotion all over like this?
Well, yes, but more important than suntan lotion is to keep a t-shirt and shorts on and wear a cap for bald men, certainly. Clothing is much more effective than sunscreen at protecting our skin. So it's really important to choose the right clothing and to go in the sun at the right time of the day. Copy the Continentals. Don't go out in the middle of the day with the mad dogs and Englishmen, but go out in the sun first thing in the morning and late in the afternoon, because the ultraviolet levels are minimal at those times of the day.
Stick with us for a couple of more seconds if our Wi-Fi holds up. We have got coming up on June the 9th, I am with He Jiong, who is a lawyer, a criminologist, and he's the author of Hanging Devils. But more important than that, he is called the John Grisham of China, and we are going to be talking to him from Beijing. So I've been reading some of his stuff. So that's, fascinating detective novels based in China. June 10th, Inside Story with Lucinda Jo Treasure, whose most recent novel, Book of Air, envisaged, a deadly airborne virus that destroyed society. We might ask you about that in a second. And then, and I've lost my notes again, everything's disappearing today. Coming up, we have Lucinda, June 16th, with Leslie Thompson, the author of the Detective's Daughter series, her latest novel, an Agatha Christie-esque standalone set in a stately home close to where a serial killer is on the loose. And on June the 17th, I'm with Victoria Schofield, one of Britain's leading authors on military history in Asia. She's written widely on Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, and became a close friend of the late Benazir Bhutto, who was assassinated in 2007. So we're going to be talking to her about all her work. Alex, that Book of Air about a virus that destroys the world, is that, and there's a lot of that at the moment, we've just had COVID. Is this a reality that could happen?
Well, I'm not sure if it's, the pandemics are a reality, and this is one of the big disappointments of the current pandemic for the UK, is that we had a pandemic rehearsal in 2016, and the government chose, for their own reasons, not to act on the recommendations. And that was part of the reason why we didn't have any PPE for the start of it, and we were so badly prepared, and why we did so much worse than so many competitor countries. It is part of what is going to happen in the future. There will be further pandemics, but we're a very resourceful country, and we've got fantastic scientists. The very fact that one of the key vaccines produced for this pandemic came from Oxford, from Sarah Gilbert, is something for us. That's just from the Jenner Institute. As well, so it's something for us to be really proud of. So it's not all negative, but I think that we were badly prepared for this one.
Yes. So the key thing is to do your war gaming, as it were, prepare for it and stick with it and fund it, because when it is going to happen at some stage.
Yeah.
Alex, what a fantastic conversation. I do apologize to everybody for the Wi-Fi problems. Did you cut out there, Alex, at some stage? So it's not just New York, it was also Bath?
No, we were fine all the way through. We just kept talking when you disappeared off the screen.
Really? So this is the great American advanced society that hit us anyway. But thank you all for being here on this Jubilee Day, and engaging, challenging, and brilliant and patient. So thank you, Alex, for being such a good sport.
Okay, not at all. Listen, thank you for the participants. I've really enjoyed the questions, and I know that a lot, it's been great. It's been great fun. I've really enjoyed it.
That is brilliant. So we're going to Beijing next week, to China. So from me, Humphrey Hawksley, in New York, if I survive it. You can't say we don't go anywhere in the world in here. Alex in Bath, thank you so much. Stay involved, stay doing your great work, Alex. Stay engaged, everybody. Stay curious, stay Goldster, and above all, stay safe. Bye, Alex. Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you.